Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Many years ago, I served on a jury. I was transfixed by how smoothly the court operated. Every person involved appeared to be at the top of their game. However, most impressive to me was the judge. As a student of how people think, I couldn't believe how quickly and precisely the judge was able to render complex decisions. I was also awestruck by the incredible presence and attention the job requires for long periods of time. To this day, I consider the cognitive skills required for a judge to be a superpower. So, dear listener, I felt compelled to interview a judge to learn more about how they think. And you are about to listen to a true great. The Honorable Judge Julia Alloggiamento has served on the bench for nearly a decade after she was elected in 2010 and was sworn in to Santa Clara County Superior Court in 2011. She has presided over misdemeanors, drug treatment court, and felony criminal trials. In addition to being an extremely learned and thoughtful person, Julia strikes me as an exemplar of humility, kindness, and integrity. So listen in as Julia and I explore what it takes to be a judge and how a judge thinks. The Honorable Judge Julia Alloggiamento, who has asked me to call her Julia, welcome to Super Psyched.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here today.
Right on. So I've just got to ask, when you were a child, could you have possibly imagined yourself sitting on the bench as a judge?
So I think that when I was a child, it's not something I imagined that young. I think a lot of that has to do with you didn't really visualize women as much. And when I was younger, being on the bench, you didn't have as many role models as women. I did, I think, get exposed to a lot of law. So my mother actually went back to school when I was in about middle school, and she had stayed at home with us and raised us and done all those really important things that stay-at-home moms do. And then she went back and started a new career and became a court reporter. And so when I was in about, 7th and 8th grade, I used to work for her and I would read transcripts, and we debate over how much she paid me because she denies that she was doing this child labor, but she really paid me, I think, a penny a page to proofread. Wow. And I just had that experience though, and that exposure of reading all sorts of different transcripts of depositions and things involved in the law. So I started, pretty young with an interest in the law because of her and also because of my dad. So my dad was also a juvenile probation officer in the county. So I had it kind of on both sides, although he did not come home and talk about work quite as much. I was probably a little bit more connected, more involved in my mom's work.
And that's part of what drew you to the law.
Yes, it just was, I think, that exposure. And then in high school, I toyed with it. I mean, I sort of thought maybe I want to go to law school someday and kept an open mind. What I really probably wanted to do in high school was be in drama. I loved to, do the plays and try to do some shows, but my career ended really early because I can't sing at all. Oh. And it became very apparent that all the shows were going to be musicals and I was never going to get the lead role. And so that didn't seem to be an option. But it's probably some of the interest in that, which really made me want to be like a trial attorney, because there is a certain amount, it's not acting, but there's a certain amount of presentation that goes with that and being in front of people and public speaking. And, you're able to put all your interest in that area.
And did you actually, you actually decided very intentionally to become an attorney who participated in trials as in the DA's office, if I'm not mistaken?
I did, although that isn't where I started my career. So after graduating from law school, I was very fortunate in that I had some options, and I had worked for a big litigation law firm and over the summer, and I worked with Morrison and Forrester, and they gave me an offer at the end of this summer, which is kind of a traditional thing that can happen in law school. And then my third year, I had that offer. And then I was taking trial advocacy, and I fell in love with doing trials. I thought it was so exciting. And it's just what I imagined a lawyer was. It was the way I perceived law, sort of standing up there and trying to convince a jury of something, and kind of the courtroom drama. And Law and Order, I think it's still on now, but was a really good show at the time. And I used to watch it and think that was very exciting. And I actually spoke with the professor for my trial advocacy class, and he had done both. He had done both civil and actually the DA's office up in San Francisco. And I asked him, what should I do? I mean, I really feel like I want to be a trial lawyer, but I also have this great position with this law firm, and they do some really good work. And they were actually really well known for their pro bono work as well. And that gave me a lot of opportunity. And I kind of liked that they did that type of work. And he sort of said, it's never going to hurt you to have gotten the experience from a big law firm, and you can always change your career, which is one of the great things about being in law. And so I actually started my career. I clerked for a judge right out of law school. And then my first 3.5 or so years, I was at Morrison and Foerster and did litigation. But litigation at a big firm doesn't really get you into the courtroom that much. And then I decided that I was really just wanted that experience, and there was no time like the present, and it was time to move. And I went and did get hired by the district attorney's office. And so spent, the bulk of my career until I became a judge trying cases.
Yeah. And it sounds like you enjoyed that. And it sounds like that was a good decision.
It was. Yeah.
And I've got to know, like what compelled you? I mean, you actually ran in an election to become a judge.
Yes.
That is really a courageous move. How did you come to that conclusion that you're going to go for it?
It was an interesting decision. And I will say that, by the time I was at the DA's office, I think that I was leaning toward that was something that I thought would be maybe the ultimate career goal, right? Is being a judge would be fantastic. And lots of times people will ask me, what is it that made you want to be a judge? And for me, I actually really thought as a district attorney, I had the role of really seeking the truth, right? That if I thought someone had not committed a crime or that we couldn't prove a crime, it was my role to dismiss it, which is, really different than civil law, right? You don't have a client, you're representing the people and the community. And so your job's to do the right thing. Then becoming a judge is even a step beyond that, right? Because now you're doing a right thing and not as an advocate, like really trying to decide in every single circumstance without an advocacy position, what should happen here? What is really the best thing for this person, for the community, for the victim, a lot of competing forces. So at some point, I had decided at the DA's office that I wanted to move toward that. And I will say that I wanted to make sure before I did that I was experienced to do it. And I wanted to make sure I had tried enough cases. I wanted to feel that I can make those rulings and make my decisions. So I was toying with it, probably for a couple years before I actually dove in. But there was also things that I was doing at the DA's office I wanted to finish. So ultimately, when it came down to it, there's two ways, as you probably know, to become a judge. And one is to run. And that's when, in our county, luckily, judges that are incumbent rarely are challenged, but you run for an open seat. The other way is to be appointed, and you seek that through the governor. And to be honest, I had filled out my application and was going to go that route, and a seat came open. And the difference between them is that with the governor, you can put your application in and you could be waiting years. There's no time frame. And with an election, I knew I would know in 6 months. And I sort of felt like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go all in, and I'm going to try to make that happen. I'm going to see if I could do this in 6 months. And so I actually did both simultaneously, which was kind of crazy.
In terms of labor intensiveness?
Absolutely. So I turned in my application, and then I went in and, chose the seat that I was going to run for. And then I had to just let the application sit and turn and completely focus on now campaigning to be a judge. And to be honest, they all kind of came down at the same time. And I got called for my interview from the governor the week before the election. And I had to say to them, I'm on the ballot, right? And they said, yes, we're aware. And I said, well, it seems like maybe the point will be moot. So we decided to put my interview the day after the election. And then I was fortunate enough to win the election. And then they said, well, now you don't need to interview because you're going to be a judge. Congratulations. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And
it was a nice way to go about it, for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, what a great way to go to get the seat.
Yes. A hard way.
Yeah.
Running was really hard. And I think it's especially challenging as a judge, to be honest. I think it's because you're not a politician and there's a lot of ethical restrictions and people don't always understand that.
Can you describe one of the ethical restrictions that was perhaps most difficult?
When you're running for judge, you have to follow all of the same ethical rules as if you're a judge. And so one of the hardest ones is you can't give opinions about things. You can't talk about cases that might come before you. You can't really tell people how you might rule on something. And so people don't understand that. And that got challenging. People will want to know, how do I feel about the death penalty or whatever, is a hot case? What do you think of that case? And I couldn't speak to it. And then the problem is then people feel like maybe you're holding out on
exactly.
You're not being transparent, and you're being totally transparent. You just can't speak to it. So that was one of the harder things, combined with, I really wanted people to choose me or not choose me just based on my qualifications. But a lot of people see someone running for any office and felt that you were, like I said, a politician. And I just didn't view it that way. So, we're also nonpartisan, right? So people would ask, well, what are you, Republican or Democrat? And I'd have to spend a long time telling them why that shouldn't matter, why it can't matter for me, because I can't take my own personal beliefs and impose them on my decisions. I have to step aside from that, right? And follow the law and make the right decision in every case, not based on partisan politics. So it was hard to get people to understand that.
Totally. And Julia, I just got to ask, what are some common misconceptions that people have about being a judge?
I think people perhaps forget or don't realize how challenging it is. How much, for me, I really want to make the right decision every step of the way. I mean, there are means to check my work, right? There's an appellate court who's going to tell me if I did something wrong. People file papers, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with me, right? Mm-hmm. And so I really do take care in the decisions that I make. And I think that we are by nature in a situation where there's advocates and where people are coming in and they're arguing one side or the other. And I'll be honest with you, I was one of those advocates. I think it's easier to be an advocate. I mean, I did, sometimes it's a lot clearer anyway. It is clear what your position was. When I was a DA, my position was to represent the community and to, kind of stand for the victim.
Right.
And it's equally important to have someone who is representing the defendant and their rights, but that wasn't my role. That was someone else's.
Exactly.
Role. It was my role to seek the truth and to do the right thing and, to negotiate cases when they should be and to, not when they shouldn't be. But I still was an advocate. As a judge, you're not, right? And you just have to take all of these competing interests every time. And sometimes you're just faced with two really bad decisions.
Exactly.
Right? And which one's going to be the least bad? It weighs heavy, I think, on judges. And I think people, think we're up there and just kind of making these decisions. And obviously the law guides us, but there's still a whole lot that's within our discretion. And it is sometimes very challenging to really decide how you want to come down on that in any given case.
I remember just in terms of my own development from kind of child to adolescent to young adult, recognizing that the world wasn't perfectly black and white as I'd hoped it would be. And I remember just dancing in the gray is such a difficult place to go. And I'm thinking about you trying to weigh two bad decisions and choosing the less bad and how incredibly hard that is. And I think that's, that's consistent with what I've heard from other folks in your line of work. And that is really, really hard. I remember Jeff Rosen, the DA, was talking about weighing two bad ideas. It's called believe it or not, it's called an avoid conflict in psychology. It's an approach. Approach is like, hey, are we going to go to Tahiti or are we going to go to France? Like, great. They both sound good. And the avoid, of course, is, are we going to go to this terrible place or that terrible place, which will be less terrible? And I'm just thinking about sifting, just how you have to do that. I've served on a jury, Julia, and from where I sat, the amount of attention required to be a judge appeared to me to be superhuman. And I'm wondering, how have you developed the skill to be so attentive and also so fast? I also noticed that the judge was very fast.
The fast comes with experience. I think that we learn, the rules of evidence in law school. Trial advocacy in law school certainly helped, but for me, it was really just trying cases, actually being in the role. And because I did try a fair number of cases, I've certainly watched a lot of cases. Most of the time, I can anticipate an objection's coming before it comes. And I'm waiting for it, and I know what my ruling is going to be, and that just comes from experience. I mean, that there's no other way than just to say that.
You can anticipate in the midst of everything else. You can anticipate it.
Yes, I mean, I know when there is hearsay. So if someone's going to, object on hearsay, that's pretty easy. And
okay, I got it.
That's coming, right? Because I do kind of think of myself when I was in that role, right, and knowing not only objections I was going to make, but you have to anticipate the other side. So that does come just from experience. I think in terms of attentiveness, that is just something that I think we know is important. I don't know. I don't know that that's a skill you develop or don't develop, but certainly it is so very necessary. There's a lot to manage. And I will say right now in COVID, it's pushing the limit for us, because now it's on any given day, if I'm in a situation where I'm hearing a contested matter, right? There's like a trial, then not only am I listening to the facts and paying attention to the law and I'm ruling on objections, but now, and watching what's going on in my courtroom, now I'm also trying to figure out what's going on the computer, because some people are appearing remotely. I'm managing technology. We're making sure everybody's wearing their masks. I mean, it's a little bit of a crazy time. But in the normal case, you have to have your eyes kind of on everything and paying attention to everything. It's probably more getting your mindset there than it is, like I said, a skill or something you learn. For me, I really do think every case that comes before me, it's so important to the people who are there. Every case, whether it's a misdemeanor, which to us, seems not as serious, or the most serious case, a homicide, it doesn't matter for any person who's affected, whether they're the victim in the case, whether they're the defendant in the case, whether they're a witness who's maybe never come to court before and terrified to have to come in and testify, even family members who are sitting in the audience. I mean, for all of them, it's so important. And so I owe that to them, right? I owe it to them that I'm going to go in and treat it as important as they feel it is, right? And it is important. I mean, all of the cases are important to not only those people, but also our community.
I'm going to use the word sacred. I'm not using it in the religious sense, but it sounds like this work in your nodding is sacred to you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just thinking of a clever pun that you are very judicious as well. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. That's terrible. But what are the traits of a great judge?
I mean, of course, fairness, right? I mean, you have to start there, right? My goal, what I would like people who come through my courtroom, whether they're, the person who's coming to court as, so to speak, a civilian, or whether they're one of the lawyers, my goal is always that they feel a couple things when they leave. First, that they feel like they were heard, that whatever they wanted to say to me, they had an opportunity to say, and I heard them and I considered it. And that they understand my decision. This doesn't always happen, but I do strive for that. I really strive to explain to people why I'm reaching the decision that I did. And especially if I have a lot of discretion in it, I want that even if they disagree with the decision I made, that they understand how I got there and can kind of respect it, even if they disagree.
Totally.
That doesn't work 100% of the time, but it's certainly, that is my goal. And so I think that, for judge, you have to be, like I said, of course you have to be fair. You have to be patient. You have to be immensely patient.
What do you mean by that?
The courtroom can be a very heightened intensity for every person coming in.
Oh,
and what I usually say, it's almost never a good day for someone when they're going to court.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what your role is, right? If you've been charged, especially in criminal, but it's true in civil as well, because it means you're in some conflict that you couldn't resolve outside of court, and now it has to be resolved in court. And that includes family, probate. You take any of the areas. It's not just criminal, any of the areas. And so I also want to recognize that. But because of that, because people are already coming in this heightened advocacy, situation, they might be angry, they might be scared, they might people come in having never been in the system with a feeling often that the system's unfair before they've personally experienced it, just based on maybe what they've seen or they've heard or they believe. And so lots of times it's trying to just tone down the atmosphere in the courtroom a little bit, with a goal of, we do want to get to the truth. We do want to get to a correct resolution here. We do want to, be able to do the best to balance all of these different things and move forward in the best possible way. But one side or the other is going to be unhappy. And sometimes both sides are unhappy, right? With a decision. And so, what I try to tell, for example, like new attorneys or maybe people just starting the business, is that with what we do, you have to really remember it's not personal, right? Mm-hmm. That the goal is to be professional, you can be passionate about your position, absolutely, and argue it vigorously. It doesn't mean that you attack the other side or you challenge the judge in a confrontational way, or you even attacked a witness. There's varying styles of cross-examination, let's say, but it still should be professional. And so that's kind of what I strive for.
And that's what you mean by trying to set the tone. Can you say just a little bit more? I'm fascinated. It seems almost like you're the conductor of an orchestra or the host at a party that nobody actually wants to go to. I'm thinking about the fact that people don't like going to the dentist. I imagine people abhor going to the courtroom. But how do you set a tone? And what tone do you try to set?
The tone I try to set is that I am going to treat every person in my courtroom with respect, and that I would appreciate it if they showed me the same. Mm-hmm. And each other. It's except in rare circumstances, it's often not that people are being very confrontational with the judge. But I do see in some circumstances, the attorney starting to get a little too personal with each other, kind of up in arms. So there's a couple of different things. For example, if you're making an argument in my courtroom, you're making it to me. If you're arguing your position on a motion, let's say, or something, I'm the one who has to decide. And you can tell when attorneys start turning to face each other and, cut each other off and might kind of starting the battle, I'll stop them and just say, speak to me, right? I'm the one. And so sometimes you do just have to kind of take a little break or tone it down. Most of the time, it makes it sound like this is a really common occurrence. Most of the time we have really professional attorneys. I think we're really lucky in Santa Clara County. We are also really lucky, because I did civil before I did criminal. I actually feel that generally speaking, people understand that stakes are high in criminal and treat each other kind of with professionalism and respect, because you're going to be working with the same kind of small community over and over and over again. And that's the other thing I tell people kind of early in their career. Your reputation is forever. Totally. And if you start on the wrong foot, it's going to take a while to, have that shift. And really starting in law school, you have to really be aware that people want you to be transparent. They want you to be fair. They want to see that you've thought things through. When you're negotiating with people, they want to understand that, you're going to do that fairly. Maybe some cases you're not going to give on. In appropriate cases, maybe you will. And you just build that reputation really early on.
And that's so important. And I'm just thinking about the idea of if somebody were to scorch the earth, that would follow them for the rest of their career conceivably. And that would be just incredibly toxic. What are some of, I'm just thinking back to the question about the attention that's required, what appears to me to be superhuman attention. What are some of the rituals or regular practices, perhaps in personal care, that keep you at your best?
There's two things that are terms that I had not thought about until kind of well into my judicial career. I actually had not heard them for a long time, but you probably can appreciate in your role. So one is, I do think judges are exposed to a fair amount of secondary trauma, right?
I think so entirely.
The things that we, especially, like I say, I have done presided over a lot of criminal cases, and the cases that tend to go to trial in criminal law tend to be the most serious, the most violent, the most devastating, and so and also the most challenging for the defendants, because they're often facing a lot of time, right? And so then their families might be there, and they're going to maybe lose their son to or daughter to prison. So it is hard to listen to all of that trauma all day as part of your job and not kind of carry some of that with you.
Right.
And so that's one thing we face. And the other is actually a term I just heard recently for the first time, which was decision fatigue. Yep. And I thought that was also a great description that I hadn't heard. I was like, exactly. There are times where it just is, we are being asked to make so many decisions that are so important. And you get kind of tired. So I try to counter both of those things. For the trauma portion of it, to be honest, I always, and I still feel this way, felt that if I ever got to the point where it didn't affect me, then that's when I think it's time to retire.
You got it.
I think that these are really serious, important, traumatic events in people's lives, and they deserve the respect of us appreciating that. So I think that dealing with all that, then for me, it's really some form of exercise has always been the thing, really just making sure that I have time to clear my mind, either going for a walk. I know a lot of judges more recently have started kind of a mindfulness practice, trying to just find some time to decompress with all of this. Mine tends to be physical. I really love hiking. I really love to kind of get out there and just walk. I can hike by myself, for long, long periods of hours with no music, nothing else, and just kind of enjoying nature, reconnecting with nature. So that does it for me. That kind of clears my mind. Going to the ocean, certainly. Hiking by the ocean being my favorite, right?
Definitely.
If I can combine those things, that's the best. So those things, really help. And then just making sure that you're doing other things in your life that are bringing you joy, right? Because we deal with so much pain that you don't want to think that that's what the world is made of. So for me, that's, family and friends and actually, I do a fair amount of community service type stuff, and that community outreach, that has always been something that has brought me a lot of joy. It allows you to find some good, in the world and be contributing to it that way.
I'm really taken with that idea. I used to provide a resiliency program to Facebook's teams of counterterrorism and child safety because they also experienced what you described as secondary or vicarious trauma. And there's this thing in psychology called a cognitive afterimage. I'm sure you've been at Disneyland, and I'm sure you've stood in line with your kids. It's a small world. And what you hear for the rest of the day is it's a small world. And you face the same possibility in your courtroom of just hearing the echoes of the courtroom for the rest of the day, and finding walks along the beach to clear your mind, or mindfulness practices. I call it kind of the trifecta of getting your photons, getting your cardio in, and engaging what is scientifically called biophilia, basically being around trees and nature.
Yeah.
These are all known antidepressant and anti-anxiety agents and great ways to clear oneself. So I think that's great that you practice those on the regular. I feel it from you, by the way.
Oh.
And the idea of decision fatigue, Steve Jobs wore the same outfit every day to have one less decision. And if you're noticing what I'm wearing, my sartorial practices are that of somebody who dresses the same way. I have a winter uniform and I have a summer uniform, so I don't have to think about what I'm doing. And I imagine you try to reduce your number of decisions too.
Well, the funny thing is, the other thing that I love to do, maybe it's good that I do both, but when I'm not exercising is actually love cooking. That probably comes from, culturally and whatnot, but I really, really enjoy taking the time to cook. But planning what I'm going to cook is decision fatigue for me. So one of the other practices I got to when I became a judge was I still am really happy to end my day and come home and make dinner for my family. Honestly, it that also sort of clears my mind, and
totally.
It's something I enjoy doing. But deciding what to cook. And so I used to sometimes call my family and say, I don't care what we're making, I'll make it, but tell me what you want for dinner. And to satisfy not having to think about it anymore, I did start every once in a while calling in the type of services that will deliver.
Totally.
You
the
prepare
box
it.
type things.
Yeah. So they deliver it. And then I just come home and think, okay, well, this is what I'm preparing tonight. And I still get, the joy of cooking and might spice it up a little bit differently, but I don't have to decide. So that's been really a great way for me to help my decision fatigue.
That is so awesome. I love that. What do you love most about your job?
I think it's kind of ties back to what I said in the beginning. I think it's a huge responsibility, and I accept that. And, I took an oath and it says I accept it freely, and I do. But it also is a job where my job is to go in and really do the right thing every day, right? Really strive for these lofty goals, right? Of justice and fairness and equality and community. And the things that I really believe in are part of my job. I think that's just really different, than, I just never have had the experience, right? But of going in and someone telling me what to do every day and maybe not being comfortable with it and still having to do it. You're pretty autonomous as a judge. Obviously we have our ethical rules to follow. We have the law to follow. There's a lot, that we are restricted on. But so long as you're working in what, in your job and doing what you're supposed to be doing, there's a lot of autonomy to that. So I feel like when I go in, I have the autonomy to make the feel of my courtroom the way I want it to be, to handle a case the way I want it to be, to set that atmosphere and that tone. And, when it all comes together, that's a great day. That's a wonderful day. And at the end of the day, if you just feel like people, like I said, feel like it was a fair process that they went through, that's the goal.
Totally. I wish I'd asked this earlier, but I'm going to have to ask it now. What was it like to be new? What are the freshman jitters the very first time you're called to the bench? I remember for me, I'll just come out and just let you know that as a newly licensed psychologist, I was totally, I had imposter syndrome for a while, but I'm just wondering, what was it like for you?
So I always laugh that the hardest thing for me, honestly, was that no one would sit down until I sat down. It was a very strange phenomenon that you walk in and they say, all rise, and everybody stands up. And then you have to sit down before everybody can sit down. And that, I don't know why, but that was the one thing that just stood out so much to me. And I would feel like I was just rushing to get down and get in my seat so everybody could sit down. Then you kind of get used to, though, as a judge, that standing and all that isn't really for you. And not to demean myself in any way, but it's for the office, right? It's for the position and the role of what you represent. And then when I kind of got into that more, I was a little more comfortable with it, right? Like I am representing or should be representing, justice. And in that, people should stand for that. They should respect that. And then that was a little bit easier. I was fortunate that I started my first assignment as a judge in misdemeanors. And because I was coming out of being a district attorney, the law wasn't new to me. So that was great.
Right, totally.
And that I felt secure in being able to make the rulings and make the decisions and rule on evidence and do that. So that part wasn't hard. It was almost more just being in the role. When you start, it's almost that they tell all of the staff to refer to you as judge and your honor repeatedly. So walking through the building, that was the other thing. People would come up, they say, hi, judge. Hello, your honor. Hi, judge. And a lot of these people I'd never met before. And I thought they must blast our picture out or something, because I don't even know how they know who I am. But you hear it over and over, and it's almost to like normalize it to you that you're like, yes, I am the judge. I am her honor,
Yeah.
But some of that actually, was a little getting used to actually.
Yeah. And I can tell that one of, your values is humility, and the idea of being called your honor or referring to yourself as judge was kind of a big step, having people stand up. And I love the fact that you were able to pair it with it being more of a valuing of the office itself, or that you are carrying forth the law and they are standing for that. That's very powerful rather than personalizing it. But I know you a bit, and I also know that you're just really like a very salt of the earth kind of person. So I imagine that, that was quite something to get used to.
Yes, it is. But it's interesting too, because as I've I'm going on 10 years now. So fast forward 10 years and you get back to it. And I look back to myself 10 years ago too. And I also do think, though, that as a woman, I think that women, this may be for any woman who's listening to this, sometimes almost don't accept the roles they've been given wholly or as easily, maybe as a man might. And that, when I first became a judge and people would say, what do you do? There's situations where maybe it's not appropriate for me to say what I do, right? Or it might not be safe or whatever. But generally speaking, it was often almost not embarrassing, but almost just sort of like, oh, I'm a judge, And then I think it took me years to realize, like, yeah, I'm a judge because I worked really hard for this.
Yeah.
And I studied, and then I did all of these qualifications. And I think, we're reaching parity. this kind of ties back to what I was talking about when I was, in third grade, maybe not really seeing a lot of female judges, but now our bench actually reached, I think we slipped again, but we're almost 50-50 men and women for the first time in the last couple of years. That certainly was not what I experienced as a new attorney. It's not what we saw. And so that's a great thing. Our bench is getting, more diverse. And I think that it brings such value, right, to have all of those different opinions. But with it, you're talking about, imposter syndrome. With it, you got to kind of own it, right? You got to own that you deserved it. You worked hard for it. And now, you've made it, and, you should be proud. I'm a judge, right? And just to tie that in, when I was running for judge, the number one comment I got, and I took a little personally, it actually frustrated me, was I would meet someone and I would say, hi, I'm Julia Alloggiamento. I'm running for judge. And almost 100% of the time, people would say, you don't look like a judge. And that was my reaction. Well, you just did that.
Wow.
Right? And, my husband actually was like, well, you don't want to look like a judge, like take it as a compliment, But for me, my answer always was, well, but I believe I'm qualified to be one. So do you want to talk about my qualifications? Because who can say what a judge looks like, right? We're not picking judges based on what they look like. If we're doing that, we're doing something really wrong. So it really should be based on your character and your integrity and your experience and all of those things to do this job that is really important for the people who come before us. And so I think, my mind has shifted a little bit more as I kind of go on. And I think that it does take, reaching out to people who might look at the bench, even the bench they see now, and say, oh, I don't look like that, so maybe I'm not qualified to be a judge. They're really two different things. And I think a lot of what we're doing now is really trying to reach out and tell people, hey, any walk of life, right? It shouldn't matter at all what you look like. Let me give you a hand. Let me show you how to get here. And so that's something that's important to me at this stage in my career. I think in terms of giving back is to look to the people who follow and say, you have it in you. You got to go for it. We want to keep the bench full of great people, qualified people, and diversity, right? And because with that brings different ideas and changes and things that are really important. So it's just been an interesting transition over, the last 10 years or so for me.
Yeah, and I just read on LinkedIn that recently the California Supreme Court welcomed its very first African-American openly gay judge.
Right. Hear, hear. It's a great thing. It's a great thing. And, there's a lot of discussion about that. And the reason it's a great thing is because, look, we do as judges have a lot of discretion, right? And we're human beings. So people come in and have your life experience and your worldviews and all of that. And of course, we try to set all of that aside. And we do a lot of training on implicit bias and, to really recognize, hey, if I'm thinking of it this way, is it the person before me or is it, the rule of law? And everybody really, I think, strives very hard to do the right thing with that. But we are human, right? And the way to sort of break down some of those barriers and get rid of kind of some of this implicit bias, I believe, is that, you're interacting with more people who are different than you. And now the more we broaden that perspective and the more we broaden the bench, we learn from each other. We see things differently. And that just is going to enhance the bench overall. So yeah. I'm really glad to see that as one of many changes that have happened, in the last decade, maybe starting before that.
And the research that I've been exposed to with regard to diversity, including even neurodiversity. I interviewed Temple Grandin, a very prominent autistic woman who was describing the importance of neurodiversity as well. It seems that we really, really get a big ROI when we engage in more diverse practice, have more diverse teams, and there are fewer missed calls because people have broader range of vision.
Right.
So that's wonderful. I'm wondering, who are some of the mentors, role models, other people, perhaps you knew them personally, perhaps you only read about them. Who has inspired you to become the person you've become today?
I guess this year, and it would be totally remiss if I did not mention Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? I mean, I think that she inspired women and she inspired judges and she inspired women judges everywhere. And so, that was a huge loss. And she did so much. I really look back to her struggles and what she had to go through. And I think even, my little struggle of, someone saying, oh, you don't look like a judge is nothing in comparison to, kind of what she went through. But she paved the way for all of us. And so she's a huge inspiration. It's hard for me when you talk about like what judges inspired you. I've been in front of a lot of really great ones. There's almost more qualities that I look for that I gain from different people over the time. Justice Mary Greenwood was someone who was on our bench temporarily. She actually was the former public defender of Santa Clara County, and then she was a Superior Court judge, and she's been elevated as an appellate justice now. And she has so many great qualities in being kind and fair and listening and inclusive and all of these great things. But when she became an appellate justice, another thing that she brought to the table was they were talking to her because about her joining that. And she was actually going to join as sort of the presiding, which was interesting that she was going to kind of be the first appellate justice, but actually be in the role of presiding. And they were talking to her about that and how her role as the public defender served her in that capacity. And she said, a lot of what I always tried to do was make work a place that people wanted to go to. And it just really stuck with me. I just thought, what a loss for us, right? That she's moving on, because that is something you bring to the table, because we do hard work, right?
Yeah, for
Every
sure.
day. And so all the things I was talking about, the trauma and all of that, that's not just me in the courtroom. That's my clerk and my court reporter and my deputy, and the attorneys sometimes. And so I really do try to make it that, while we're dealing with really negative things in court, I want my courtroom to be somewhere where people want to come to, right?
Yeah, as much as people,
even jurors, I really want jurors to want to come there, but that's a whole different challenge.
Yeah, in spite of all the dread that they might be experiencing, you're hoping to really neutralize that and make it something positive, as Judge Greenwood would. Make this a place people want to come.
Right.
I've got to ask, just kind of as a follow up on that one. You've kind of already talked about setting the tone. I'm just wondering if there's anything else in the mix that you try to put out there, because you are what the viewer can't see but probably can hear. I mean, the listener can't see but probably can hear. Is that you are an extremely positive person. You appear to be a very happy and authentic person. What might you kind of want to put in the air so that people want to be there?
I mean, maybe I'll think in terms of some of the things I tell jurors, because that is where also people, jurors are interesting coming into court because they're definitely not choosing to be there. They've received a little thing in the air and then they come in, and I find a lot most are kind of annoyed and are busy and feel like they don't want to be spending their time all day, every day dealing with it. And what I usually tell them is that, as they're sitting in the audience thinking about what they're going to tell me to get out of jury duty, I spend all of my hours thinking about what I'm going to tell them to stick with it. But my experience really has been that people, I mean, you were talking about you served on a jury and you really enjoyed it, but that when people kind of do participate, when they do get an opportunity to actually serve, that they find it really rewarding. And it definitely can be that. Right? That you should feel the reward of the importance of the work that we are doing. And jurors serve an enormously important role in that. And so what I want, for my jurors is that they come in, they know I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to make sure that they are safe, that we're taking breaks, that we're doing everything to make them comfortable, but that they're going to be involved in the system in such a really real, authentic way, right? Where their decision and their vote is so important. And so, that's for kind of the members of our community, but just also for anybody, the work we're doing is really important. I want people to feel that, to feel how important and it is. Yeah.
Julia, what is a typical day in the life of a judge? I mean, can you describe it?
I will do my best. It does vary based on your assignment. So we do have different roles depending on that. But I'll give you a typical day as a felony trial judge. So the type of judge you might see on TV who's hearing cases all day. I would typically get in the morning, maybe 7:30 or so, spend some time catching up on a lot of emails, responding to things, kind of normal judge duties, review any papers, anything that had been filed. And then often we are starting the trial and listening all day to witnesses, making rulings on that trial, moving the case forward, keeping track of timing, making sure my jury's okay, et cetera. Most days, I will say, it seems like every day, but many days we have noon meetings, and that would be either training or it's different committees. I told you I do the outreach committee, might be leading trainings, I might be leading committees, go right back to it at 1:30 and are in session again till about 4:30 or 5. And then sometimes we have some other additional duties in between time. So on a break might be looking at doing some research that maybe on issues that have come up, maybe dealing with search warrants sometimes on a break. So it's pretty nonstop the whole time that we are there. That's if you're listening to trials all day. It's very different. If you, on other cases, you might go in and you are hearing what we call a calendar. So instead of hearing one case sort of through the trial, you might have days where you go in and you have, depending on the type of case, maybe 30, maybe 50, maybe 75 cases on in the morning.
Wait. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, you
Wait,
did.
try me. I can't quite understand that.
So it depends on, I mean, looking back over my career, probably the most I ever heard was when I very first started, misdemeanors were very impacted. And I think my high number was I had 110 cases on one morning to be heard between 9 and noon. And obviously, if you do the math, that's near impossible.
It's near impossible. I did the math. I mean, that's 240 minutes over 4 hours.
It's not 4 hours, it's 3.
3 hours. So we've brought it down to a mere 180 minutes.
Yes. And then there's, a 15-minute break in there. So some in that scenario, in that type of scenario, not all of those cases will necessarily go. There's going to be some matters that are obviously continued. There's matters where maybe people didn't show up, bench warrants get issued, those type of things. You're really relying on the attorneys to be prepared when they come in, but you might be taking a plea from something. You might be changing some orders. But yeah, it's a quick paced term.
And what is one of these cases like? I mean, just it's the attorney saying this is what happened and this is how the person
mostly in that setting, that's every time you're in kind of a calendar, that's a really before a case has gotten to trial, and that's
right.
Really almost like managing. So it's almost like case management type of a scenario. And so, I mean, in those, you're moving the bus along, right? But you're not really making a lot of the hard decisions. The attorneys hopefully have negotiated outside of court, coming in maybe with resolution. Your role at that point is maybe taking a plea, making sure, going through the rights with the individual. When I did really high volume calendars like that happened both when I was in misdemeanors, also when I did drug court, and to some degree, although less so, not quite as heavy, but a lot of cases to handle also in juvenile. But in the really high volume ones, which juvenile's not, I used to really still say, if someone's making an admission, even though I have kind of what I need to say pretty well memorized and it becomes kind of rote, right? I'm running through people's rights. That might, to me, be kind of a standard thing. I would really force myself to remember for them, it's probably the first time it's ever happened, right? Especially, something like misdemeanors. They're admitting to committing a crime. I still am going to make sure I'm speaking slow enough and make eye contact to make sure that they understand that I do recognize this is important to them. So they get my best 1 minute in that scenario.
Wow.
But it's still important, right? That you are still engaging, because it's very easy to just run through it, by memory. And it's sometimes I have to kind of slow down, and I actually actively think of the words I'm saying to make sure I'm saying them with meaning to these people, even though I have to kind of run through it quickly.
I'm so glad I asked that question. That's incredible. My second to last question, I'm wondering, how do you charge your mind? I mean, how do you provide yourself with basically continuing education for yourself so that you can constantly move the ball forward in terms of your own abilities?
So I'm going to answer it in two ways, a short way and then a little bit longer answer. The short way is, in terms of education, we have, required education. So things are ever changing. And as
right, of course. And I'm not speaking about that type of stuff. I'm just talking about.
Yeah. The other way, for me, one of the benefits, even though I felt that there were some challenges, one of the benefits of running was I have always prided myself on the fact that I was chosen by the people, right? Yeah. They actually were the ones who picked me as a judge, not, the governor of the day or, whatnot. And so I have, since year 2, I think since my second year on the bench, I've been the chair of our court community outreach committee. And for me, that's where my education comes from. I think it's so important that judges keep kind of, so to speak, their finger on the pulse, right?
Totally.
But that we really do know what is going on in the community and what they are thinking and feeling, and also give them an opportunity to see the authentic us, right? Because when I'm sitting up there on the bench and in my robe and, far away from everybody, you see the role of the judge. that's different than who I am as a human being, right? When I'm out and I'm doing community outreach and I'm going and talking to kids and talking about the Constitution, or we read to students, or engaging in discussions right now, we started engaging the community in discussions about racism and things that we know are the really hard issues that we have to address, that we are going to have to talk about in the system, then that is where I learn the most, right? And that's where I re-energize myself, because often that's a more positive experience, right? That either I am teaching them something or I am learning from them, or both, usually both. And it really keeps me looking forward to, kind of this role I have in being able to connect with the community and hope that they're understanding our third branch of government, right? Which sometimes just kind of gets lost amongst the branches. And that I'm understanding what they're living, so I can apply that, and keep my eyes open with every case that I'm dealing with.
That's great. And I've got to ask you, this is my final question. As someone who's sat on the bench for nearly a decade, what are some of the things that you've learned while you've been sitting there?
Oh, I've learned so much. It's hard to know. I mean, I guess over time, there's a couple things that I've learned from other judges, or learned just being there. I have definitely learned that every person there absolutely is a human being with their own kind of concerns and rights and challenges coming in, and that what is most important is that we respect that, right? So even if I'm in a situation, there are situations, right, where I don't have discretion. Maybe a young man is going away to prison the rest of his life, and maybe, society has decided that's the right thing because, he took a life, or whatever scenario. But that's still a human being, right? And I'm still going to treat that person with dignity and respect, and make sure that the experience, like I said, in my courtroom was one that wasn't the hard thing for them, right? Not, having the experience in my courtroom. I have really learned that we can, as a system, be something where people have a position and take a position, passionately argue their position, but continue to still interact and see each other as human beings, right? I just think our system will do better as a whole if we remember that we are all serving different roles that are very important and going to take different positions, and certainly not always going to agree. I mean, you're only in court because you don't agree. But that where we can find agreement is just in the humanity between us, then that will make, the whole experience a little bit better.
That's beautiful. Julia, it's such a pleasure to speak with you about your history and where you've come and how you think about things. It's been really just incredibly enlightening. Thank you so much for sharing.
It's been my pleasure. It's really nice to see you and chat with you again.
Right on. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.